So the final ISF talk, I was told the most awaited speaker for the evening today, we have Dr. Krishnamurthy V. Subramanian, Executive Director, IMF, earlier Chief Economic Advisor for the Government of India. We would request you to please come up on the stage and please deliver the ISF talk for the audience here. I think all of you have to be all ears to listen from the man now.
Actually, let me tell you how I brought KV to ISF event. When I was in US, our friend KK, where is the KK? In fact, everybody should give him a clap of applause. He is the one who brought KV to Dallas from Austin and introduced, though I knew him from ISB days when he was a professor at Indian School of Business. But afterwards, he became a very big man. He became Prime Minister's Chief Economic Advisor. He was a very, very busy person at that point of time. Though he used to come to Hyderabad during the budget time, but very, very difficult to meet him. But after the stint, I mean, now he is with IMF. And though he was supposed to come and speak on the first day, he had so many programs in the Prime Minister's office, and I don't know where all he's been pulled into. So he has to leave again today. He's going to IIT Kanpur. So I requested KV to give a lot of support to our ISF activities globally, because he's connected globally. Not that IMF is going to give a lot of funding to our startup, but his connections, his mentorship is going to be very, very useful. Thanks, KV, for accepting our invitation. Thank you.
Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, J. Chaudhary Garu, for inviting me to share my thoughts. Thanks a lot to KK for putting us together. It's indeed my privilege to be here sharing my thoughts on such an important aspect. You know, if India at 2047, India at 100 has to become a developed nation, then startups have to play a very, very critical role. And so it is my privilege to share what I see as the vision for India when it turns 100. I'll give you a little bit of background so I'm going to be speaking based on my recently released book, India at 100. You can go and find it on Amazon, India @100, numbers 100. The subtitle of the book is Envisioning Tomorrow's Economic Powerhouse. I'll give you the bottom line. The bottom line may seem audacious, but hopefully in the next 15-20 minutes, I'll be able to explain to you the economic logic and the reasoning behind what I see this as the size of the Indian economy in 2047. I expect the Indian economy to be a $55 trillion economy in 2047. Now, that may seem audacious, and some of you may be wondering, you know, whatever he had in the morning, whatever he smoked, I want a piece of that. It seems to be some cool stuff. Let me, hopefully by the end of the talk, tell you that I'm absolutely sane. I've been very sane even while writing the book, and I've reflected a lot on this prediction, and with a lot of rigor and conceptual thinking and empirical evidence, data, I've actually come to this conclusion. So I'll explain to you why I think India can be a $55 trillion economy in 2047. But before that, let me share briefly the motivation for me to write this book. The motivation was a twofold one. First was a more prosaic motivation. When I was part of the government in 2021, the India at 75 activities were going on. And naturally at that time, my thoughts went to how the economy will look when India turns 100. So that's where the thought for India at 100 got germinated. But a more powerful, compelling motivation was what I observed, inside out about a lot of the commentary on India, being part of the government. So I don't know how many of you might have noted, but I joined as the Chief Economic Advisor in late 2018, in December of 2018. And the first press conference after the GDP numbers got released that I had to go and deal with, India's GDP growth had declined to 5.3%. Of course, we all know that the impact of policies in the past, things that have been going on manifest, and so, but I had to go and defend it. And at that time, I felt that there was a lot of negative commentary on India, on the Indian economy. In fact, even today, we find a lot of negative commentary on the Indian economy. For instance, there were people saying that there is something structurally wrong with the Indian economy. Hereafter, India will have to persist with only 5% or less growth. People even use terms that are actually loaded with religious overtones when giving labels to these growth episodes. And when COVID struck, then at that time in particular, many commentators actually took pleasure in talking and giving doomsday predictions about the Indian economy. So at that time, I actually felt I had the privilege of being able to in October of 2020 to make the prediction that the Indian economy will register a V-shaped recovery, and I'm glad that it happened. There was a good amount of judgment, of course, but there was a good amount of credible hope in which, with which one made that prediction, because I felt that at that point in time, it is important to actually display economic leadership. It's very easy to kick, whether it's an individual or an institution or the country, it's very easy to kick when someone is down, but it's far harder to actually lift that individual or the entity up and say a pat on the back and say, no, you can do it. And that's what, at that critical time, once in a century pandemic, that was what was required. But in this process, seeing so much of the negative commentary on India at that time, and even now, for instance, and by some people who have occupied very august offices, in the country, I got the feeling that it is important for positive thinking also to try and push back on a lot of the negativity that that a lot of commentators tend to actually enjoy encouraging. And in that context, I have actually come to now conclude that for positive outcomes to manifest, positive thinking is necessary. But for negative outcomes to manifest, negative thinking is sufficient. So if for negative outcomes to manifest, negative thinking is sufficient, but for positive outcomes, positive thinking is only necessary, then positive thinking has to work much harder compared to, to sort of counter the negativity. And, it is therefore, so the India at 100 book is essentially, it's a small, as we speak, if you think about that a yajna or a fire sacrifice, it's a small ahuti on my part to actually to generating that positivity, because there is a lot of positivity. There are lots of positives about the Indian economy, and that's what I want to share with you now. So if India grows at 8% from here on till 2047. And there is a decent if to it. I'll come to that, why we can do it in a minute. If India grows at 8% in real terms, then the Indian economy can indeed become a $55 trillion economy. Now, before I give you the economics of how we grow at 8%, what are the other elements of that $55 trillion economy prediction, it is important to seek inspiration from other examples, other countries that have grown at similar paces. So, let me give you the example of Japan. Japan from 1970 to 1995, this is a 25-year period, 1970 to 1995, grew its economy in dollar terms by almost 26 times, actually 25.6. And in 1970, the Japanese economy, the GDP was about $220 billion in 1970. By 1995, 25 years later, the Japanese economy had reached $5.5 trillion, a multiplication of 25.6 times. Japan, as you know, is a democracy. If I give you the example of China, I will give you, but you might say, we can't compare with China because we are a democracy, China is not. And that's why I've given you the example of Japan, which was a democracy. Now, some of you may say that, that growth for Japan happened during a, honeymoon period for the global economy. The reality is it was not a honeymoon period at all. In fact, during 1970s to 1995, that was the period of the Vietnam War. That was the period of the oil shock. As a result of the oil shock, the US faced double-digit inflation. The entire Volcker phenomenon, the US has never faced that kind of inflation, since then. And interest rates went so high. Obviously, demand fell. So all these tailwinds were, all these headwinds were things that the Japanese actually had to encounter, and yet they grew from 220 billion to 5.5 trillion, growing their GDP 26 times. What I am estimating for India in the 25-year period is actually much less than that, about 15 times multiplication, not 25 times. So one of the main things actually I want to want to emphasize is that we in India, especially as a country and as an individual itself, there are only two words that we need to keep saying, make it as a mantra: we can. We can. And I think that is the most important. If a Japan can, why cannot we? If a China can, and China actually, let me give you the example as well, from 1996 to 2021, the Chinese GDP grew 22 times in dollar terms. Now, of course, you'll say China is different, but I've already given you the example of a democratic nation, Japan, which grew its GDP by so I've been given a chit saying 3 minutes. I'm not going to respect that, because I've gotten the carte blanche from Chaudhry Garu saying, you take the time that you want. So, if Japan can, if China can also grow, its GDP over 20 times, why cannot we do that? We can as well. What is most important is for India to deliver GDP growth in real terms at 8%. Now, let me give you the number crunching behind this, economic number crunching, and then I'll give you some of the drivers why I think actually this is something that is possible. So, firstly, if you look at the growth rate of GDP that has prevailed for India, from 1991 onwards, in real terms, our GDP has grown at about 7%. That's been the average GDP growth from 1991 onwards. So, from 7% on average to 8% on average is a stretch goal, but it is not something that is actually, it is not, I'm not asking for a doubling of GDP growth. It's only a stretch goal. And we've grown at 7% during the last 30 years despite, so many problems. We have a very slow judiciary. We have a bureaucracy that actually can improve significantly. We have our human capital, actually education levels can be much better. Poverty was much higher during this 30-year period. Of course, it has declined. Abject poverty was also there. Despite that, we've grown at 7%. Lots of problems, lots of challenges, and yet we've grown. So 8% is a stretch goal, but we can do it. It's ambitious, but it is achievable. And I'll spend some time on what will be the key drivers for this later, but let me just focus on the numbers. So if we can grow at 8% with 5% inflation, that's been the average since the inflation targeting regime was implemented in 2016, where the central bank, Reserve Bank of India, has to actually target inflation at 4%, has to deliver inflation at 4%. If you check the data from 2016 onwards, the average inflation has been 5%. So it's a very reasonable expectation, therefore, for me to say that going forward also inflation will be 5%, because Reserve Bank of India has to deliver inflation between 2% to 6%. So 4% plus minus 2. So 5% is at the higher end of that range. So 8% real growth, 5% inflation translates into 13% in nominal growth terms. 8 plus 5, 13%. Now, in order to estimate the growth that will happen in dollar terms, I have to also tell you what is the likely rate of depreciation of the rupee vis-a-vis the dollar that will prevail, going forward. And here I'll first give you the number and then explain why I think that is something that will prevail. My estimation is that from here on, the rate of depreciation of the rupee would be less than 1%. 1% per annum. So it will depreciate by about, so maybe 50 basis point, 0.5%, maybe 0.6%, but less than 1% in a year. So with 13% in nominal rupee terms, 8% plus 5%, because depreciation reduces the value in dollar terms. So when you convert from rupee to dollar, actually depreciation reduces the value. So we have to subtract that 1% depreciation. 13 minus 1 is 12%. So 12% in dollar terms is what we get with 8% real growth, 5% inflation, and currency depreciation of about 1%. Now, let's use the rule of 72. This is something that all of us economists and people who actually work in markets as well use to know how many years it's going to take to double your money. The rule is very simple. 72 divided by the rate of interest that you get. You basically, whatever number you get, that's the number of years it will take to double your money. So remember, for instance, the time when national savings certificates actually used to double our money in 6 years. Do you remember that? It used to double our money because the rate of interest that was paid on that was 12%. So that's because 12 times 6 is 72, or 72 divided by 12 is 6 years. Similarly, growth at 12% in dollar terms will mean that GDP will double every 6 years. This is important. Keep in mind, GDP doubles every 6 years. Now, let's take the 24-year period from 2023 to 2047. If GDP doubles every 6 years over a 24-year period, how many doublings will happen? 4 doublings, right? 4 doublings, because 24 divided by 6 is 4. In other words, 2 into 2 into 2 into 2, 2 to the power 4, which is 16 times. So that's what I mentioned by actually saying that, we can multiply our GDP by about 15 to 16 times. So now let me tell you, in 2023, India's GDP was $3.28 trillion, approximated to 3.25. So the first doubling is 3.25 to 6.5. Second doubling is 6.5 to 13. Third doubling is 13 to 26. Fourth doubling is 26 to 52. 52. So 52 is close to that 55 trillion. I've not done an Excel calculation. I've just done a mental calculation with all of you, and we are close to that 55 trillion number. So the most important, aspect of this is 8% growth. Now let me spend a little bit of time explaining to you why I think that 1% depreciation of the rupee is what will prevail in the future. If you look at the data in the past, rupee has depreciated by about 3.5% per annum. 3 to 3.5% per annum. So compared to that, why do I think that the rate of depreciation will be lower, going forward? There's a very simple reason for that. If you look at the inflation that has prevailed in India from 1991 till 2016, when India implemented the inflation targeting regime, inflation was about 7.5% on average, during that period. But since then, from 2016 onwards, inflation has reduced to 5%. Now, one of the aspects of, when you think about international economics or, currency depreciation, it is that the currency that faces higher inflation has to experience higher depreciation. Why is that the case? Because if currency faces higher inflation, so, what does inflation mean? Today, what you can buy using 100 rupees, what you can buy using same 100 rupees next year is less. If, in real terms, actually, your value of that 100 rupees is only 95 rupees next year if inflation is 5%. Similarly, if you take, let's say, the US inflation has been about 2%. So in the US, $100 this year will be worth $98 next year. So in other words, the value of the dollar has not eroded as much as the value of the rupee has eroded. Now, when inflation was 7.5%, the value of the rupee was eroding much faster than that of the dollar than when inflation is 5%. So as a result, you actually have the currency having to depreciate more in order to keep the purchasing power the same. If you have to have actually the purchasing power of the rupee vis-a-vis the dollar unchanged, then the rupee has to depreciate more in order for, basically 98 versus 95. So you can see 98 divided by 95, you see so that's the main reason. So when you have therefore a reduction in inflation, there will be a concomitant decline in depreciation as well. So about 2.5% decline in the rate of inflation will translate 1-for-1 into a lower rate of depreciation. That's why instead of 3.5% rate of depreciation, about 1% is what we'll get. So that explains actually. So let me once again summarize quickly: 8% real growth, 5% inflation, 8 plus 5, 13. Subtract 1%, 12%. At 12%, GDP doubles every 6 years. 4 doubling, 16 times doubling. That's why from 3.28 to 55 trillion. Last, let me end with actually what are the key drivers for this 8% growth. I'll not elaborate too much, but let me just leave you with these 3 thoughts. One of the most important drivers of this 8% growth can be formalization of the economy. If you look at the Indian economy, it has been significantly informal. If you step out of the engineering staff college here, you go out, you'll actually find many people who sell idlis, let's say, on a shanty or some makeshift store. You will find people who are selling dab, basically maybe on a thela kind of. They're all informal establishments. When these establishments become more formal, their productivity increases. And growth is essentially about 2 things, which is investment and productivity. How much investment you make, how productive is that investment. And when informal sector firms become formalized, when they become more formal, their productivity increases significantly. Because you can think about it, a store, somebody who's actually selling idlis, let's say, using, doesn't even have a shop. If he's selling idlis, when he constructs a shop, he maybe has two people. The food that will be made actually will not get as much dust, etc., because it's covered, more hygienic, so he can, charge a higher price. If he has two more people to basically cook, he can actually sell more as well. So together he can sell more and charge a higher price. Obviously, for the same investment he's making in terms of his labor, in terms of its capital, he's reaping greater rewards. So productivity increases. So this is something that economists, nobody quibbles about, which is the fact that formalization of the economy will increase productivity in the economy. Second is, even among the formal sector firms itself, Indian formal sector firms are still far behind their global peers, in terms of the productivity. And they will catch up, and they have been catching up over the last 3 decades, and especially over the last decade. For instance, if you check the Global Innovation Index, latest, a couple of days back, the rankings came out. India is now ranked 39 in the Global Innovation Index. In 2015, India was ranked 85. From 85 to 39 in innovation. And by the way, this is not government data. This is data put out by the Global Innovation Index. Actually, they put it out across all countries. So this is not, nobody can dismiss this as say, oh, I don't believe this data. This is actually, Global Innovation Index. Similarly, if you look at entrepreneurship, again, I'm giving you these statistics, using World Bank data. If you use World Bank data to look at new firm creation, from 2004 to 2014, the rate of growth, or what we call CAGR, cumulative, annual growth rate of, new firms from 2004 to 2014 was 3.2%. From 2014 onwards till 2023, new firm creation, the growth rate is 220%. 3.2% versus 220%, and this is basically startups. This is so relevant for this conference. Combination of innovation, combination of entrepreneurship, this is what will actually enhance productivity of our formal sector firms as well. That will be the second driver. Final, most important driver in my opinion, which is credit creation in the economy. Now, whenever credit is taken for creating assets, for instance, if I actually, when I started out, when I was in school, I used to drive a bicycle to school. Then, when I came to class 11, my father bought me a moped. So, to school earlier it used to take me about 45 minutes of cycling to go to, with a moped, which was basically an asset, I was able to drive and, reach my school in 15 minutes. So I was saving time. My father didn't take a loan, but if he had taken a loan, for instance, that asset creation makes you more productive. That half an hour that I saved, actually I could use it to study better. I was becoming more productive. This is true in general. When firms also, when they take on, loans for creating assets, they become more productive. And here the runway for India is significant, because if you look at credit creation in the economy, what proportion of GDP is basically being given as, how much credit is there as a percentage of GDP. If you take the rest of the world, for every 100 units of GDP, about 180 units of credit has been given in the economy. In contrast, if you take India, for every 100 units of GDP, only 58 units of credit has been given. So 58 versus 180. Think about the runway there is. Large sections of our population still remain unbanked. They don't get loans. They have brilliant ideas. They can actually go and create firms, but they don't get credit to be able to go and create. There's another aspect that is, very critical for the startup ecosystem. So from being able to grow from, the current 58% levels to close to 150, 160%, there is huge opportunity. I'll give you a very specific example to illustrate what kind of power there is from credit creation. Take India and South Korea. India and South Korea in 1960, if you compared the data, in 1960, the credit creation percentage of GDP was 6% in South Korea, 8% in India. In other words, India was ahead of South Korea in 1960. Fast forward 60 years, in 2020, India's credit creation is 58%, South Korea's is 180%, 178%. And that is why they actually have, today, when we buy phones, we are buying Samsung phones instead of them, buying possibly our Jio phones. When we buy a car, maybe that's why we're buying Daewoo cars, and actually instead of them buying our nano cars. So counterfactually, if you think about it, if this kind of credit creation had happened, for our manufacturing sector firms, for our export intensive sectors, it could have been the reverse, where we might have been exporting to them rather than importing from them. That shows the power of credit creation in the economy. Together, these three drivers itself, in the book, of course, I've covered many other aspects, judicial reform, bureaucratic reform, education, healthcare, digital economy, digitization, climate change, all these. I'm not getting into that for paucity of time, but just these three drivers themselves can push growth from what has been at 7% to 8% and thereby deliver the $55 trillion economy. To summarize, I'll leave you with this anecdote, hopefully an anchoring example that you can relate with. In India, Bollywood and cricket are actually religions. So I'll give you an example from cricket. In 1993, when Sachin Tendulkar had played cricket for a few years, it started playing cricket in 1989. At that time, Sunil Gavaskar assessed his potential. Based on his performance of 4 years, Sunil Gavaskar said that if he does not score at least 40 international hundreds and at least 15,000 international runs, I'll be very disappointed. In fact, he explicitly said, I'll go and strangle him myself. So that was it was a paternalistic statement assessing the potential. In a similar way, I have no pretensions of being, Sunil Gavaskar. I'm certainly not of cricket, not of economics either. But by looking at the potential, by looking at the performance of the Indian economy over the last 3 decades, in a similar way, I can assess that India offers the same potential as well to be the Sachin Tendulkar of the global economy in 2047. And for that, that's the second lesson from this in this example. Just because Sunil Gavaskar said it, Sachin Tendulkar did not score that 100 international hundreds and the 50,000, close to 30,000 international runs. He had to work very hard. He had to overcome setbacks. He had to actually, when he encountered challenges, he had to find innovative solutions. India will have to do that as well. In particular, state governments will have to do a lot of hard work, especially reforms. And I want to leave you with this particular message. Think about it. When the union budget is presented, all of us actually pay a lot of attention, ask a lot of questions to our finance minister, to the secretaries, etc. Do we ask similar questions to the state's finance minister, to the state secretary? About what reforms have you done? What are the reforms you have done for startups? What are the reforms you have done for enabling manufacturing? What are the reforms you have done for ease of doing business? What are the reforms you have done for enabling ease of doing business in our, these are questions that we need to be asking, because power and responsibility are two sides of the same coin. Whenever we look at narratives, especially at the, when we look at the media, states only talk about their power, saying the center is infringing into this, infringing into that. When, center oftentimes is having to actually do that because states are not doing it. So, when states start talking about their responsibility, then there would be no need for the union government to actually having to do these things. So the hard work that Sachin Tendulkar did, today that hard work has to be done by the state governments, and we as citizens have to do the hard work of putting pressure on them, asking them these same questions. And I'm hoping, therefore, next time when the Telangana state budget is presented or the Andhra Pradesh budget is presented, you all will ask the same questions of the state chief minister and the state finance minister, and CII and FICCI will actually, and ASSOCHAM, and all of you will organize sessions where you will basically unravel the state budget and say, hey, why didn't you do reforms? Show me my reforms actually on, what have you done on this? Ask those questions. Then you will be doing your part of the work as well as citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for the powerful ISF talk. And I'm sure there's a lot of math running in everybody's heads at this point in time. Can you please turn on that mic, please?
Very excellent articulation and very optimistic numbers what you have given. Have you considered some of the issues which may crop up in India? The way today what I have seen myself in the government, they'll enable by the time I finish my question. So I've seen before reforms, post reforms, there is a big change, right? Then now today what is happening, every political leader, irrespective of the party, they're all going for freebies rather than industry reforms, and even at the central government, at the state government, that's one issue. The second issue, the way generative AI is trying to hit the job market. Because today economy, if Hyderabad, if I see, in 89, though the pharma industry was there and there is no economic drivers in Hyderabad. Nobody was spending money in the malls. Nobody was going. Once IT industry started employing, they had a lot of money, surplus money to go and spend, and started buying cars, and all that happened. Today, we have seen that in all the IT metropolitan cities, IT-driven economy. If in case the tsunami hits India, the BPO, KPO jobs are all going to be eliminated as per the predictions. Lakhs of jobs are going to go, and our youngsters are not capable of taking up the new jobs because they don't have the cross-domain skills. They only have the screwdriver IT knowledge. They don't have beyond that. So if the unemployment rate goes up and there are no job opportunities for the youngsters, and in case if there is any war between X country, Y country, maybe China or India, any geopolitical, that kind of a situation, have you considered any of those things while coming up to this kind of a number?
Thank you very much, Chaudhary Garu. I think that's a very good question. I, in fact, have. So in the book, I have laid out 3 scenarios. The scenario that I'm hoping for and I'm pushing for and I'm actually, really I'm really enthusiastic about is the 8% growth. But there are two other scenarios, which is a 7% growth, which is what has been in the past, and 6% growth. If India grows at 7%, then we will be about a $40 trillion economy, and if we grow at about 6%, we'll be about 30 trillion. So even if let's say if you want me to give you a let's say even more, even if we grow at 5% on average, we'll still be about a $20 trillion economy. So I think the question is, we should be far more ambitious. Now, whenever we think about a long period like 25 years, obviously there will be challenges that will come about. In other words, there will be potential headwinds that will come, but equally tailwinds will also be there. And many times, I think when we do a balanced assessment, it is important for us to actually keep in mind both potential headwinds and potential tailwinds. I'll give you, because it's some other headwinds I can actually clearly anticipate, and I've written about it in the book as well. Deglobalization, for instance, that's one. Climate change, that's another. Overall, change in the nature of production, etc. On the specific thing of employment, actually, I've covered this in great detail, and it's important to understand that when it comes to AI, artificial intelligence, etc., there is far more fear in this than the reality or the assessments by experts suggest. So, in the book, I actually cite some very good research by Darren Acemoglu and David Otter from MIT. So they've done this analysis, and they've shown, which is actually quite interesting. The first piece of data they point out in their paper is they look at the US Census Bureau, what are the professions that were there in 1960, and then compare to what are there in 2020. It's very interesting for us to understand this, especially in the context of technology change. So out of about 40 broad professions that were there in 1960, only one profession is actually not there in 2020. Guess what? Can anybody guess which is that profession that is not there in 2020 that was there in 1960 in the US? Can anybody guess? Okay, let me for want of time. Elevator operators. Elevator operators is that only profession that actually has completely dropped out. 3 professions have undergone changes. For instance, what was typewriter, it basically has changed now into sort of keying into computers, etc. Transformation, but only one profession has dropped out. In other words, what is the basic takeaway that that these authors Darren Acemoglu and David Otter suggest is that the fear about the impact of technological change is far more than the reality. And they also give examples of, for instance, if you take the ATM, teller machines, right? If you look at, and actually it's important to keep in mind that when you look at that process of just a substitution of that activity of ATM, a physical teller versus basically ATM machines, there is a substitution. But if you look at the entire supply chain, which is producing the ATM machine, a number of people who work in producing that, people who actually, shift money in and out of the ATM machines, security guards that are there, all that when you take into account, none of which was there earlier when physical tellers were doing that, then you don't see necessarily, that there is a substitution of capital, or labor substituted by capital. When you look at it in the broad, so in other words, when AI comes in, yes, maybe there'll be a change that exactly the kind of coding that our engineers may have done, actually maybe that may get changed, but there'll be others that'll crop up. So there'll be a change in the nature of professions. So I think some of the fear about employment laws that we actually have, there'll be a change in employment, but not. And I want to leave you with this because I'm compelled to. I'm sure you will you will relate with this, Chaudhary sir. That if you remember in 1950s there was this movie of thespian Dilip Kumar. The movie name was Naya Daur. You remember Naya Daur? In that there's a very nice song as well. Saathi Haath Badhana. Ek Akela Thak Jayega. That song, right? If you think about it, what is the plot of that movie? that plot of that movie is actually a labor versus capital, struggle, because that plot is basically Dilip Kumar is a Tonga driver, actually a horse cart driver, and the villain in the movie is somebody who actually brings in a bus to substitute and take out the horse cart. Classic, capital replacing labor. And this, the reason I'm bringing up is that even in the 1950s, this conversation about capital replacing labor and therefore the fear was very much there. Today also it's there. Every time technological change brings this up. But I think it's important therefore to have this longer perspective and thereby not be... bottom line, I think there will be challenges, of course, but we have to be responsive to those challenges. And, I think for me, what I see, and I'm sure you're a visionary as well, sir, so you would agree with me that many people look for challenges in an opportunity, but I think leaders look for an opportunity in a challenge.
Thank you so much, Mr. Krishnamurthy. We also got to know that...
transformation of India's financial sector, particularly in the
Can we
realm
stop
of
the video,
fintech.
please? Our AV team has become overactive now with the numbers. Thank you so much. We finally got to know mathematicians also watch movies.
I'm not a mathematician, first of all,
Man of numbers.
Yeah, but I do watch movies. I play cricket also.
Nice. With JS's order, I'm requesting if there is one audience question and our speaker is ready to take that. Can somebody pass on the mic, please?
Thank you so much, sir. It's an honor to hear you. Sir, one conversation that I attended in ISB changed the course of my life. I was into social impact space earlier. I was in ISB hearing you present about 5 trillion economy. And there's one particular point that you mentioned, sir. India should focus on infant startups, not which are dwarfs. And India as a nation should invest on infant stage startups and ensure that, like a matured economy, we should ensure that they grow into giants. And that one particular point, using that, I pivoted from social impact space. I studied startup ecosystem for 2 years and then started Nandi Ventures to invest in early stage startups. And along with investments, right now we started Start Hub in Gachibowli to mentor and nurture early stage startups. And as you mentioned, sir, that is the greatest thing happening. And I was part of the jury in this session, sir. No words can suffice the amount of contribution that JSR made to the entire startup ecosystem. A big round of applause for him. Sir, the galaxy of leaders from corporate world you are able to bring together, this is the greatest learning that can happen, sir. For a youngster who is sitting in this place for 3 days, sir, my question is that going ahead, especially with the AI space, where do you see India playing that role? Till date, we are seeing technologies from the developed world and re-engineering that. India should lead that AI transformation, and what we should do on that. Thank you so much.
Very good question. So let me first acknowledge that I am not an AI expert. Long back, I studied at IIT, but that's been 30 years back. So, incidentally, I must mention my BTech dissertation was on application of neural networks to electrical engineering problems. And today, AI is a much better version of neural networks. But so I'll say something. But that's been more than 30 years back now. 30 years. I think one of the areas where India can be really very, very innovative is especially in the use of AI for much better welfare, social welfare in particular. I think India has shown the path. If you see in the last 10 years, if you see, we've created bank accounts for about 550 million, bank accounts. That's 1.5 times, almost 2 times that of the population of the United States. I do not miss even a single opportunity to remind all the board members at the IMF, all my board colleagues, saying that, we've created as many bank accounts as double the population of your country. Similarly, if we look at, and this is the other anecdote that I provide, that if you take the number of digital transactions that are done in India, if you put it on a balance, on one side you put the number of digital transactions that happen in a day in India. On the other side, you put first the number of digital transactions that happen in the United States. Add to that the number of digital transactions that happen in Europe. Again, add to that the number of digital transactions that happen in China as well. Yet, the number of digital transactions that happen in India will tilt more. Fact. And that actually tells you that that's why we're able to make payments even to, today, for instance, many times people who are, if at a light, traffic light, if we actually say, if a beggar comes and, says that, wants money and we say, we don't have change, he says, Google Pay de dijiye. So, that is actually illustrated. This is where I think the use of AI, one of the chapters that I've written in the book is actually use of data for welfare. And I think this is an area that India can really make a big difference in providing really, powerful welfare. Because one of the things I realized actually, and this is also relates to the earlier, when we think about freebies versus welfare, it's an important distinction we have to make between freebies versus welfare. For instance, let's take the bank accounts that were, at the time when the bank accounts were created, there were many economists that basically said, this is just a freebie, but what it has done is actually it has created capability. So the distinction I use is a freebie is basically giving some loaves of fish. Welfare, on the other hand, effective welfare is teaching the poor to be able to fish for themselves. And why is this important? For instance, I'll give you this example, and this was, I learned from the Honorable Prime Minister this particular, when we were having a conversation on, the fact that 800 million people are being given free food. Okay. Now, many people will say this is a freebie, that, giving 800 million people, but the Prime Minister actually, helped me understand this, which is, what has happened is, if you see in the last 10 years, poverty has declined from about 12.2% to about 2.2%, okay? But those who have actually come above abject poverty still remain vulnerable to just one shock. One shock, that shock could be health shock, it could be some other shock, they can again go back into poverty. So, and this is something he said, that it is important for us to actually, handhold them for some more time so that they do not go back into poverty. This benefit that we've had from reducing poverty from 12.2% to about 2.2%, we need to sustain that. In order to sustain, it is important to provide them that safety net. And I think taking care of their most important, which is food requirement, is actually one way of providing that safety net. And I think that is something that really enhances capacity. I'll add one more. And when the Honorable Prime Minister said this, I related this with something that I learned. Nobel laureate Gary Becker at the University of Chicago taught this to us. One of the things he said is, poverty itself actually changes your mindset. And I think that's a very important point. When you are poor, you basically do not plan for the future. You are thinking about your next day or maybe your next salary. Your mindset is actually very, very, very short term. You're not able to actually think enough for the long term. But when you get over and when you actually have that insecurity that I might still fall back into poverty, that mindset remains. So it is important, once we get them out of poverty, that mindset also changes. They can think for the future. It's not as if the poor are any less smarter than us. It is just that because of the travails that they've gone through, their mindset is different. So when we bring them out of poverty like this, and in a sustained manner, their mindset can change. They can say, oh, now I want my kid also to go and get education. And so that my next generation is much better than I am. And that is how actually growth happens, societal and economic growth happens. So in a sense, therefore, bottom line, what I want to say is we want to use AI in a way for social welfare, so that we actually can really uplift a lot of, because I think in our country, what we need is actually, we need compassionate capitalism, we need dharmic capitalism in this country, not the rapacious capitalism of the West.
Subbu, I'll call you Subbu as I know you personally. I have 10 seconds. I will ask you one single question. I wanted to ask you on the freebies, which has already been answered. My question to you, Subbu, is what sector, manufacturing sector is booming vis-a-vis semiconductor industry, and he also touched on the IT industry. Which sector do you think can contribute more or equally contribute to the 5 trillion economy?
So 5 trillion we'll get in just in some time, and actually in maybe 2 years, 3 years. So 5 trillion. Our next target should be 10 trillion and beyond, 55 trillion to 2047. So I think the contribution of manufacturing overall will be very important in this. Equally, agriculture is important, and services. And in agriculture, and I want to take up couple of minutes here. Again, agriculture is a state subject. Here, this is something which I want states to think about. Couple of important aspects. For all the rhetoric that politicians talk about farmer as annadata, farmer as basically, really this, that, and they talk about the talk is when you think about actual policies, the actual policy really undermines the welfare of the small farmer. I'll give you 2 examples very clearly. If you take any other producer in this country, it can be a producer of this suit, it can be a producer of this mic, could be a producer of this water bottle, anybody. Any producer can go and sell his or her produce anywhere and to anyone in this, in the country. It is only the farmer who is not allowed to go and sell his or her produce to actually whomever he or she wants to go and sell. So this APMC Act actually mandates that they have to go and sell in the local mandi only. And as a result, what happens? I've actually seen this. I've visited and seen a small farmer. Builds his let's say has his produce. He comes in the morning 8 o'clock, hires a tractor trailer to actually get his produce. The arhatia or the intermediary knows very well this small farmer has no one else to go. He cannot, because he is mandated to sell in this mandi. What does he do? He says he will make this small farmer wait till about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. The guy is getting frustrated. He's actually hired a tractor trailer. He's lost 1 day of work to be able to come and sell this. By 3, 4 o'clock, he's desperate. To actually, he says, jo bhi bhav de do bhai, actually main bech deta hu, whatever price you give. And as a result, data shows it. And this is again actually a clarion call for politicians to think. Data shows that among small farmers, if 100 rupees of value added happens, in that 100 rupees, more than 90 rupees goes to the intermediary. The small farmer gets only 10 rupees. So for all the rhetoric of farmer being annadata, are we really respecting the annadata by giving him 10 rupees of the 100 rupees value added? Now, if this is what the farm laws tried to do, and it was a very good reform. Today, states have to do it because agriculture is a state subject. What can they do if basically APMC Act is modified? Simple thing, and all this corporatization, etc., is complete humbug. I can tell you why. Because if, for instance, when you look at every other producer in this world, has there been corporatization? Are small people who basically go and sell, let's say, flowers, those who go and sell, are they suffering from the ills of corporatization? No, of course not. Or you take any let's say it's a water bottle manufacturer or the manufacturer of idlis or those, none of them, right? So why the fear of corporatization? Why is it talked about only in agriculture? It is clearly political. It is important to recognize here that if, for instance, that same small farmer, if he has the freedom to go and sell anybody, same thing, he comes at 8 o'clock, he comes to the APMC mandi, at 8 o'clock he's basically waiting, let's say 1 hour. The arhatia or the intermediary says he's not bought. The farmer goes and says, Saab, aapko kharidna hai kya? Nahi kharidna hai. Nahi kharidna hai to main jata hu. I'll go somewhere else. If you're not buying, I'm going to the next mandi. You know what this will do? They say that threat is very credible. Now that small farmer does not have that threat. When the small farmer has that threat, this guy will basically be able to say, okay, chalo main kharidta hu, I'll buy, and he'll pay him a much better price. So of the 100 rupees value added, he will get at least 50 rupees. As simple as that. This is just common sense actually. Another example I'll give you, and this, because it's important, I'll actually spend some time here. In agriculture, It's a simple fact that supply is seasonal, demand is all through the year. Rice crop, for instance, comes during the Kharif season, wheat during the Rabi season, but we actually consume rice and wheat all through the year. When you have demand that is all through the year and supply that is seasonal, you have to store. You have to store. And yet, what does basically the Essential Commodities Act do? Essential Commodities Act actually equates all storage to be holding. Go back to some of the Bollywood movies. There used to be this Jeevan character who had actually been shown as a retailer who's storing some grains, actually is shown as hoarding. That is what we've done, and that is why there has been no investment in storage infrastructure in India. You look at in the United States, you have so much storage infrastructure. And who gets hurt by this? Again, the small farmer. Because the small farmer cannot go and store his produce. He has to go and sell his produce. And during when the season actually crop is coming, there is huge supply. Obviously, price is low, so he doesn't get enough value for his hard work. If he can go and store, some farmers will choose basically to say go and sell later when the price is higher. They'll get a much better. This is just common sense. It's not even economics. And yet we basically, for all the rhetoric of a farmer as Annadatta, etc., we are not treating farmer as Annadatta at all. We basically just really hurting the small farmer. This is something that states have to do. So agriculture is incredibly important, another sector, but for that actually the biggest onus is on states to reform, and this is something that we all of us, we as consumers will also benefit from this.
Hello. Thank you very much. I would just like to add one point here to let know the commitment of what Professor K.V. Subramanian brought here. As we all know, actually we scheduled his keynote on day one, the first keynote, but he had a meeting with Prime Minister Modi on the same day, and right after that he had a meeting with Pakistan delegation. Few hours after that, he straight away traveled from US to Hyderabad. He could have easily said no, but he stood by his word to come here and deliver the keynote. Thank you very much, Professor KV.
Thank you very much, Dr. Krishnamurthy. It is indeed an honor. You are not only a good speaker, but I'm sure everybody's got an adrenaline rush after you spoke. And there is a lot of math running around. It's an honor for ISF 2024 to honor you with a Lifetime Achievement Award. Can we have the AV, please?
Driving force behind the transformation of India's financial sector, particularly in the realm of fintech. As the 17th Chief Economic Advisor, he championed key reforms that modernized India's banking and digital payment systems, setting the stage for a fintech revolution. His strategic vision has helped enhance financial inclusion and digital governance, aligning India's economy with cutting-edge technology. With academic credentials from IIT Kanpur, IIM Calcutta, and the University of Chicago, Subramanian brought deep expertise to critical financial reforms. His work with SEBI and the Reserve Bank of India has strengthened corporate governance and financial stability, while his leadership continues to guide India's position in the global fintech landscape. Currently, as India's Executive Director at the IMF, he remains at the forefront of innovations shaping the future of finance.
Dr. Krishnamurthy V. Subramanian, Executive Director, IMF, earlier Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. We are honored to present you with the Lifetime Achievement Award 2024 to recognize and honor the exceptional and outstanding contributions you have made to the financial and to the fintech sectors. Thank you so much, sir.
Hello. I would request Mr. Dinanath, Seshadri, Satyendra,
Hello.
Banu, Achyut, Bipin to come onto the stage, please.
Hello, Krishnamurthy garu. You have very nicely interpreted about agriculture. In fact, I have been planning to ask you a question about agriculture. Luckily, at the end, you have touched that part also. But my question is, the major employer, largest employer in the country is agriculture. You said Japan has got 26% growth and India can get 15. I feel India can get more than Japan provided Indian agriculture is properly taken care of, like Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao took care of the entire Indian industry, economy by unshackling it. If Mr. Modi, who is able to do Jamli and could take Kashmir as a part of the country, he only can do and unshackle this great elephant called agriculture, largest employer, who can create greatest employment and create great wealth also for this nation, and we can exceed even the Japan 26, we can become 30 also, and we can touch very near to America. May not become number one, but we can definitely become one of the largest second economy in the world, provided agriculture is second. There are so many hurdles for the Indian farmer, right from production to the marketing. He cannot decide the price. Even before product producing, he is put to unbearable problems. His vote is required by the nation, by all the politicians, but he is totally neglected. But laborer is given more preference by the government for vote's sake, but the largest employer in the country who is producing food and enriching the economy is totally neglected. And if he is taken care of properly by controlling this Narega, where labor shortage is killing the farming agriculture, whatever medicines, agriculture, non-agriculture, organic, inorganic, leaving all this, farmer is capable of doing all research by himself and can rise. Like Indian economy has come up. When Narasimha Rao thought that if just you don't create hurdle for the Indian industries, country will develop. That same thing can happen in agriculture, provided Mr. Modi can take a decision. He alone can take decision. Since you have got access to him, please convince him before Jamli and other things, he can do this and do the Jamli also. We need only one president for the country instead of Prime Minister and all, and that person like Modi can do it, and agriculture should be unshackled, which can create largest employment for the country. Thank you.
So here, as I said before, I think we have to recognize it was tried, we know very well, with the Farm Bill, and we saw the kind of opposition that was, and it was actually portrayed as the center trying to actually get into the domain of the states, that this is the power of the states, because agriculture is a state subject, and that is how it was portrayed. Now, I think we have to be actually, practical here and recognize that we have to put onus on, our chief ministers as well. We cannot, just because, see, the thing is, somebody who does good work, only he should do all the work, and others should basically not do any work, is something that is not acceptable to me. The simple fact is that agriculture is a state subject. Why should not we be expecting the state chief minister to actually free agriculture? The shackles that are imposed on agriculture is a state subject. So if the farmer, the small farmer is really the Annadata, why can't the chief minister go and really respect the Annadata by doing these reforms? I think it is, in my opinion, it is fair to ask, because the chief minister enjoys enough power as well. So, power and responsibility come together. It cannot be that only somebody who actually, does, and we, keep all the onus, put all the onus on only him, and cut slack for those who basically don't want to take the responsibility. We have to put the responsibility. In my opinion, I absolutely have, because I'm telling you, actually, when I was with the government at that time, and it was tried, the Farm Bill, and we saw the entire opposition. It is something, after that, now again, for us to expect, is something is basically expecting the sky. Now, the responsibility has to be squarely put on the states. It is a state subject, and state chief ministers have to walk the talk. When they talk that Annadata, farmers are Annadata, let them walk that talk by actually freeing agriculture, because it's a state level subject.
Sir, one thing.
We'll have offline discussion.
No, one.
Nagana garu, we don't have time. We'll have offline discussion. Now, on behalf of all our ISF volunteer team, we really want to thank you for coming all the way to talk to our ISF startups and the ecosystem. Thank you so much, KV. My only request to you is, how do you help us to take this momentum to go up with all your connections, network? Because we believe that we don't tell our conference as a conference, it's a networking conference. We believe network is the network. So, what kind of suggestions that you can give to enhance the network, so that this network can be passed on to the young entrepreneurs, and they will create the economy. They will, whatever the discussions you and Mr. Naganagaru this thing. I think they can challenge all those things, provide innovative solutions for the farmer community also. Forget about the government, forget about whatever they have been. Let them keep on doing those things. I think let us give the power to the startups. Let them come out with innovative solutions to overcome all the issues, so that the economy also will be better, farmers also will be better. What way you can help us on that?
Sure. My pleasure. I'll be happy to be involved. I think, let me just leave you with these thoughts that the startup ecosystem, I think, is by far the most important. As I was mentioning earlier, new firm creation has grown at about 220%. I think for India's problems to be solved, we need startups to be solving these problems. That is the most, because the kind of enterprise, the kind of energy that private sector, especially entrepreneurs, bring is something that cannot be ever matched by the government. In fact, because the business of doing business is with business. Too many businesses, but let me say it again. The business of doing business is with business. So, and entrepreneurship is actually, in some sense, is the best barometer of the vitality of an economy, because entrepreneurial firms challenge incumbents and thereby actually push incumbents to also become more innovative. And today, startups, and this is the message I want to leave with all of you, try to solve India's problems, actually, make money. And let me tell you, more than even the service that any of us maybe does as policy maker, an entrepreneur provides yeoman service to the country. Why? Because they actually provide jobs. And jobs are by far the most important. I will tell you, as a policy maker, if you wake me up at 3 o'clock in the night and say, hey, you policy maker, what is it that keeps you awake at night for India? I will say jobs, jobs, and jobs. And so, entrepreneurs can help solve this problem. Think about solving, India's problems. Think innovatively. I think I completely agree with Chaudhary Garu. Things like, for instance, agriculture, water. Take one of the really important aspects, something which I keep thinking about. If civilizations actually have always come around places where water has been in abundance, and yet we have now places where there is shortage of water. But it is not because there's actually any overall shortage. There are, if you take our overall rainfall vis-a-vis the demand for water, there is enough. We have to think about better storage technologies. We have to actually access, and these can be areas where, startups can be working on. Are there ways to store water better? This is where technology can come together. This is a problem. If I were an entrepreneur, I would start thinking about water itself. Can we actually create some solutions that maybe reduces the influence of the water tanker mafia? These are aspects that actually, startups can work on. Like that, climate change, pollution. For instance, and this is one of the things, can startups think about improving the quality of life in cities? Can you reduce the traffic, for instance? Is there a way, today, for instance, to go from Gachibowli to Safilgoda in the morning today, it took an hour and a half for us, and this is on a Saturday. And the distance is only 22 kilometers. 22 kilometers is 15 miles. 15 miles, actually, KK in Austin will drive in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. In Washington, D.C., I will drive in 20 minutes. That's it. And here we are taking an hour and a half. Can startups go and think about solving this problem? Of course, state governments have to do it too. But these are the kind of, think about India's problems and solve those problems. Make become prosperous by solving India's problems. You would have done such national service. Chaudhary Garu and we were talking, there is a saying in Hindi, neki karo, darya mein feko. Neki karo, darya mein feko. Do good, forget about it. That should be the spirit. Do good, and I'm telling you, eventually, this is of course is a point of view. I think like Chaudhary Garu as well. I don't work for anybody else. I only work for the divine. He gives me all my promotions. So in a similar way, if you create, I have absolutely no hesitation in saying it. If you create startups that solve India's problems, you would be serving the Mother India, and that boss that is up there actually will be really, really very pleased. And when Chitragupta writes your account, actually you'll find a lot of assets in your balance sheet.
That's why our focus is only on startups. Thanks a lot, KV. Thank you so much. KK, please come on to the dais. You are responsible for bringing him to ISF. Please come.